Tell me all about your latest obsession. Are you a fan? Got guilty pleasures? Yeah, your confessions. What the hype? What the hype? Take me from fan to stand. What the hype? What the hype? Ooh, what's the hype? Yeah. What the hype?
Welcome back to What the Hype. I feel like I have so much power because now I get to play the theme music. Usually
I
I'm
know,
just
it invigorates you,
back.
right?
It
You're
does,
like,
yeah.
I get to push the button.
I had to do the fade out and everything because we have the extended cut here. And I was like, oh yeah, I got to fade that out. So, well, thank you so much for joining us again. We are here to give you guys the second installment of our Bridgerton series. We kicked off the premiere of our show with the Bridgerton primer episode. So we hope that you enjoyed that as well. This time around, we are holding nothing back and everything is on the table from all three seasons, plus Queen Charlotte, in case anybody wants to bring anything up from that end. And we're really excited to dive into season 3, but consider this your spoiler warning because, like I said, we're just no holds barred. So proceed at your own risk or hit pause and binge Bridgerton and come back and join us for this special episode. I'm Pam. I'll be your host, and Micah and Laura are back with me.
Hello.
Natasha was going to come back and join us, but life got in the way. So we're sad that we'll be missing her this time. But we do have another special guest, Morgan, who is a friend of the show. Welcome, Morgan. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, I am so excited to be here. And it was such an easy yes when you messaged me, especially because I have some reactions after watching your reaction video.
That's right. Laura,
I can't wait to hear.
You and I did a reaction for Bridgerton.
That's right. We did. And it's funny because at the time, I think we were still kind of reacting. It was like an afterglow sort of thing, which I think is relevant for this season. Definitely.
Mhm.
Lots of spiciness. But I've definitely had more time to absorb the show and do some rewatching since then. So there are some things that I have more critical thoughts of, some things that I've warmed to a little bit as well. So I think I've evolved in my feelings over the last few days.
Laura, I'm holding you to everything that you said in that reaction video.
Oh, shoot.
Well, you and Morgan, Micah, because I know Morgan just got a bone to pick with us. And I don't know, this might be like the first and only time she's here if she hates us by the end of this episode. Well, Morgan, before we kick things off, I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself to the listeners because you're also a podcaster. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do over on your show?
Sure. And that's still so weird to be called a podcaster. So I'm actually a psychologist, like outside of the podcast world. And I started a new podcast a few months ago called That Nerd Thing. And basically I interview people from the arts and entertainment world and just, everyday people like you and me. Even, not like you guys. More like me. Like you guys are like celebrity podcasters, but about the things that they're nerdy about. Yes, you are.
Your show is fabulous, though. We've definitely been
it's a
keeping
fun
up
time.
with it, and you've been getting some pretty amazing guests on there as well. So congratulations on all the success you've seen with your show. You've really gotten it up and running in such a short period of time.
Thank you. I feel like I created it just so I could talk to the people that I want to talk to. And I'm just like, what life am I living right now? It's so much fun.
It's the best way to motivate yourself to work on your passion projects for sure. We actually recorded the first part of our Bridgerton series before the first part of season 3 even came out. And at the time, Laura, you were a newbie, and Micah, you were kind of like our everyman casual watcher. Do you all want to give us an update as to whether or not those fan statuses for both of you have changed at all since we all binged season 3 and went on this journey together?
Yeah. So when we recorded our first episode, I was like 3/4 of the way through season 1. I got hooked on it pretty quickly. And I think it was evident in the episode that I was like, can we hurry up and finish recording this so I can go watch the rest of season 1? But I will say it didn't stop there. I very quickly got through season 2. I actually ended up what did I do out of order, Pam? Because I watched Queen Charlotte too. And I think it was, I think I watched Yes. I watched the first half of season 3 after I finished season 2. Then I went back and watched Queen Charlotte. And then I got up to speed and was ready for the second half of season 3. And really enjoyed the series, I would say holistically, but I gotta say, honestly, I think my favorite season in the Bridgerton universe was the Queen Charlotte spinoff. It was so good. And not to say that the rest of Bridgerton isn't good, but I just felt like we got so much amazing character development in Queen Charlotte. And I have such a better idea of who that character is and what her motivations are and kind of what's going on behind the facade of her little war of wits with Lady Whistledown. So I feel like I actually got the most out of the spinoff than I have out of anything else.
I think I'm still in that casual viewer category. I really did like the first season, but I feel like every subsequent season I've maybe enjoyed. I'd say season 2 probably I enjoyed the least. Season 3 probably ranks second. And then I've only just started watching Queen Charlotte spinoff, which I've actually enjoyed the
Ooh.
first couple of episodes that I've watched, but there just felt like there was a lot going on this season and it all didn't
Mm-hmm.
really gel together. Is
Yeah,
that
and
a bad perspective to have?
it's
No.
not, and you're kind of in the majority of that opinion for sure. And I'm so happy you brought that up. But given how much ground we did cover in season 3, I do want to kick off by asking you all if you felt like the season needed to be split at all, because this is the first time that Bridgerton has played around with it. This is a new business model for Netflix, right? To split seasons, but we haven't actually seen Bridgerton do this up until this point. So did that make both parts feel disjointed to both of you? Do you feel like one half was heavier than the other in terms of just how many plot points were going on at any given time? I mean, Bridgerton is an ensemble show, but I also felt like season 3 was a lot busier than some of the other seasons that we've gotten.
So I'm glad you asked this question because I've always been curious. Is this a network decision? Is it a show decision? Or do they jointly make the choice together to split the season?
I feel like this is a Netflix decision just based on the fact that they've been introducing us to this 1-part, 2-part model for at least a year now, if not longer. I think it started off with Stranger Things,
Stranger
right? The last
Things.
season of Stranger Things also split into 2 parts, and that was the big deal.
There's tons of marketing upside, both for Netflix and Bridgerton to do it this way. It actually gave me flashbacks to Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2. And this is probably more of a question for the group, but is this likely to be their biggest season from a plot perspective? And if that's true, why not create a little bit more anticipation? I think, at least for me, like we soon forget, we grew up in an age where we always had to wait until next week for each new episode, and sometimes longer if there was some kind of scheduling conflict or it was a holiday. And that is still true of some shows today. You have to wait each week for a new episode to come out. So I think in some ways we've gotten a little bit spoiled in getting everything all at once. Now, if I wasn't doing this podcast, I don't think I would have run to watch the second half of season 3. And mainly that's because there wasn't any major cliffhanger to end episode 4. Now, all that said, I also recognize I'm not the target demo of this show. So
That's fair. Do you know what's so funny is like, I think I personally was like stressing because there was no Lady Whistledown reveal yet. And like their Penelope goes off to get married. It's like, they can't get married without dealing with that huge elephant in the room. So I think that like, for me, that was what caused like my heart rate to spike a little bit based just purely on how they were going to pull that off. But I don't know, like it's interesting to hear from you that sounds like it didn't register, and it makes sense because I've read the book, so I knew that the Whistledown reveal was in the book that the season is based off of. I just didn't know if they were actually going to go through with it the way it happens
and
in the book.
was it also the whistle down reveal, not just for Colin, but for the reader as well?
Yes. Yeah. The book. So I've only read the fourth one, but even the way the fourth book is written, you don't know that it's Penelope until Colin finds out.
Wow, I didn't know
I
that.
see. I didn't know that. I wonder why they decided then to make the reveal at the end of season 1.
That's what a lot of people were wondering. My best friend
Yeah.
had read the books years before the series was greenlit at Netflix. And I remember watching the first season and having that big reveal, which Laura had not experienced yet the first time we recorded. And I was like, there's no way they told us this. Like, this was their biggest secret to keep. And I really thought they were going to hold it closer to the chest for longer. And I immediately texted my best friend, Michelle, and I was like, do they is this real? Like, is Penelope actually Lady Whistledown? She's like, yeah. And she goes, and I'm shocked that they said that because you actually don't even find out until her book.
Wow.
So people had to read 4 books until they found out who Whistledown
To get the payoff.
Mhm.
Yeah. I guess they wanted to ramp up the tension in the show for the viewer, for us, because we knew it was Penelope. So we weren't so much invested in the mystery of who is it. We were invested in how long is Penn going to be able to pull this off, and in the various twists and turns of that journey of potentially being caught and having Eloise get accused by the queen at one point. So it feels like maybe that was a choice for the narrative in like a TV setting where they're really trying to ramp up the tension over the course of multiple seasons so that you as the viewer will care because you're invested in Penelope's character. Honestly, when I think of characters that I'm invested in from Bridgerton, Penelope is one of them. So it makes sense to me that they would make that choice. I don't know if the payoff is what they were thinking it was going to be, though, ultimately, with how this season came about. And to kind of go back to your question, Pam, especially now that I'm up to speed and I understand the formula, which is basically the couple ends up married and happy at the end. I'm not sure that the season, or I'm not sure that splitting the season was strictly necessary like that, because kind of like Micah, as someone who hadn't read the books and understood that the Whistledown reveal was going to have to come in the latter half of the season, I didn't really feel a cliffhanger with episode 4. So I didn't necessarily get the need for the split. And to be honest, to Micah's other point about weekly releases, I feel like a show like Bridgerton would actually do better with weekly episode drops.
I think so too, especially when you think about like how some of these episodes do end on a cliffhanger in a way that makes you want to keep watching. And I think there's something to be said for weekly releases. House of the Dragon just started back up again. I'm so excited that HBO is still doing weekly releases because I think it's really cool to be able to sit with stuff like that and to be able to talk about it for a whole week with your friends. Like this show would probably be formatted in such a different way if we had weekly releases or even like bundled releases. Like I know Laura's covering The Boys for What the Hype. Something like that would work well as well.
Yeah. I mean, what The Boys is doing is they dropped the first 3 episodes of the new season last Thursday. And, you know, henceforth, everything's going to be weekly. But it's really hype to do like a 3-hour season premiere. So they could even do it that way and then just go to the weekly format. Because can you imagine the anticipation, especially with some of the 3.5 episodes and the way that they ended and the various plot points that we're weaving throughout? Like the hype would have been there for sure if you had weekly releases.
I loved the split because just the hype that was building up and the reactions online about the carriage scene and everybody talking about that. Like, I think it made it so much more fun to chat about it and to then theorize about what was coming next. I do think they really tried to play up the spiciness, and I think they didn't give as much as I thought they would based off the interviews, but I kind of liked having a break after the carriage scene. And maybe it wasn't a cliffhanger, but it was just a huge scene to end on that I think was really fun to talk about and to think about.
Yeah, it is nice that they gave that the moment it deserved, because if you're in this fandom, that's something that people have been talking about for literal years, waiting to see if they would adapt to that. So yeah, from a fandom perspective, especially if you want to enjoy the water cooler talk, so to speak, it is really nice that they at least had that in the first half so that you could enjoy it and you could talk about it, and the internet could come in with all the hot jokes that they made, which there were many and they were fantastic. So it was a fun, like, couple weeks to exist until it died down, and then everyone was just like waiting for more.
I loved the first part because it just had that buildup and that tension that I like, that romantic buildup, that slow burn. And we didn't really get a lot of that in the second half. And I think that's also why the first half did so well.
So did you guys, the rest of you, did you like the first half better, or do you feel like the second half was stronger?
I felt like the first half was better. Just from a pacing standpoint, like everything that they tried to cram into part 2 was all very interesting, but even just revisiting it over the last few days, I've been like, man, damn, that's a lot to try and get into like 4 or 5 episodes, and also allow Colin and Penelope to have their story.
Yeah, it definitely had a feeling of being rushed. And personally, this is just me. I would have loved a little bit more blackmail. I would have loved a little bit more, like, let it simmer for a period of time. And that's where with certain shows, you have it go not just one episode to the next, but season to season. And I think that's something, just going back to what we were talking about before with the reveal of who Lady Whistledown is, that's something they could have kept in the background all the way up until maybe even the second half of this season. That would have really landed a lot better, I think, than maybe it did at the end of season 1. I agree, Laura. There were some things that just felt like they were trying to get it in. Not dissimilar, Pam, you brought up, well, you didn't bring up Game of Thrones, you brought up House of the Dragon, but that was a lot of the criticism around the final season of Game of Thrones, is that it felt like they were trying to cram so much in and didn't give it the same breathing space that the first several seasons got.
Yeah, that's my issue with it too. And I know that there are a lot of people that really enjoyed season 3. I'm really happy for all of you. And it's not that season 3 was particularly bad, but I do think that they do a disservice to some of these really cool arcs that they're trying to serve us because of the 8 episode model that streaming is kind of tied itself to. I really think that Bridgerton, and there are probably other shows too that are in the same boat, they really need the space of the 10 to 12 episode arc specifically. And it's interesting because one of my friends was also telling me when we were talking about this that, Shonda Rhimes comes from network television where she gets 22 to 24 episodes to play. So throwing in all of these subplots and these dramatic arcs, maybe even 1 or 2, just like Bridgerton had 1 or 2 moments that were fairly dramatic, actually works to her benefit because she has so much room to play over there. And there's just not enough time to play in this world, even though people want more of it.
I wonder, Pam, you and I talked about this a little bit in our reaction. It really seems like next season might be another dual season. Like potentially we'll be looking at Francesca and Benedict having their stories. We know Francesca's going to Scotland, so that's probably going to create a split in filming locations, which means they're going to be trying to fit even more stuff from, London and then Scotland into the show. Whereas they had all these other loose ends in the ton, they still needed to tie up before they could do that. So it makes me wonder if they were trying to cram all this stuff in so they could move on to their next phase, which is splitting the show between 2 locations.
Unless Francesca comes back for like the marriage season. Because don't they do that? They go back and forth.
Yeah. But it seems like once they're married, we don't see as much of them. Like Daphne who?
I know. I'm not going to lie. I forgot about Daphne until like basically the very end.
That's one thing that I don't like about the show. I wish the siblings still had a role, because I think we were missing a lot of like the great conversations with the brothers, at least. Like I love when Anthony is with all of them and that banter goes on, and I was missing that.
Yeah. And I mean, we get these beautiful moments between Eloise and Benedict too. Like, I love their sibling relationship, and I wish we got to see more of it. Because when those two are on screen together, they're fire.
So Micah started talking about the blackmailing element, which was one of the bigger B plots of this season. I wanted to ask you all if you had a favorite or if you were just kind of fatigued by the majority of them. I know it's a tough question because there were a lot.
My favorite, I think, is the Violet, Marcus, Lady Danbury relationship with the three of them. I definitely would love a spinoff of all of those characters.
Yeah, I was happy to see that too, because that was something they, had started hinting towards in Queen Charlotte. And after I watched the first half of season 3, I was kind of confused about like, what is going on between these characters. And then I watched Queen Charlotte and I was like, okay, I get it. I understand. And there's
That's right, I
this
forgot about
baggage
that.
too with Lady Danbury having, shaboinked Violet's father when she was a child and her mother was still very much alive. So it was really good to like have clarity on all of that. But I loved how they brought it full circle and made it about these women recognizing that their bond with each other was way more important than whose family member you were potentially courting or being courted by. And them kind of putting their bond above all of that, I really loved. I feel like there were some themes that I could have really liked if there had been time for them to breathe. I think Cressida's story in the second half of the season could have been a lot more compelling if if there had been time for that storyline to breathe. It just kind of felt like one episode she's blackmailing Penn, and then like at the end of the next episode, it was pretty much established that it couldn't have been Cressida. And she was back to being shipped out of town. So it moved really quickly. I felt the same way with the resolution between Penn and her mom with Lady Featherington. Because again, it was such a beautiful moment of development between those characters, sort of closing the book on what had been and making the conscious decision to be better going forward. But kind of felt like we were more being told and not shown that development happened. So I just think, and I think Micah brought this point up earlier, a lot of these themes just didn't have enough time or space to breathe, to actually feel organic, and like they weren't these smaller arcs that were happening over the course of like 2 to 3 episodes. Does that resonate with anyone else?
It does, but what's so funny is that you're talking about all of these like moments that they told us and didn't show us. I actually feel like while they were doing all that, they were doing the opposite to Colin and Penelope. I feel like the reason why their resolution felt so rushed and in a lot of ways like a little bit unsatisfying is because they were trying to show us and not tell us what these characters were feeling.
Yeah.
And I think in the case of them, I just needed I know they're all going to be happy at the end. I just needed a little bit more reassurance that everything was going to be okay. Like, even when you think about the whole wedding sequence, which, very beautiful, very romantic, you still don't even know. Like, you have to assume that he's still marrying her because he loves her, but you don't even really know, because before that, he has this whole moment where he tells her that like maybe she just wanted to trap him all along and that he was going to marry her because they'd had sex and he was a gentleman, which is like his whole shtick in general.
Yeah.
But it's like, but then you get to the wedding, you're like, okay, well, like he gives her the reassuring nod, and then they have this like very romantic dance where everybody like disappears and he like touches her cheek. It's like, okay, well, like maybe they're still in love. But I just feel like we needed them to tell us that everything was going to be okay. So yeah, it's really weird that they did it one way for some characters and then another way for their main character.
Well, and speaking of Penelope and Colin, hasn't it been confirmed at this point that a lot of their scenes, including some extra sex scenes, hit the cutting room floor?
I saw
That is
those
the
rumors.
rumor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like it's coming
Hit the
up.
carriage floor, Laura.
Yeah. Oh, right. They were too distracted to get those in because Colin had to get something else in. But yeah, it definitely feels like there was a lot of hype around what we were going to see unfold between Colin and Penelope in the second half of the season. And while what we did see overall, I felt good about, it did feel like there wasn't as much screen time as I would have expected of the main couple. Like, I think back to season 1. Think about the number of times we saw Simon and Daphne just going to Pound Town
All the montages.
the time.
Every episode, even when they were angry. Yeah.
Yeah, there was hate sex, there was sad sex and love sex, and there was just a whole, like, it ran the gambit. And then in this one, it's like, okay, we have a virginity loss scene and a carriage scene. And then there's like one snippet towards the end where she's like on him. And that's it.
Don't forget the heavy make out in the middle of the street.
Oh,
unchaperoned.
Where he's like, yeah, let me finger you against this doorway.
Yeah.
Like, what is, by the way, Pam, you and I chatted about this briefly
we've been talking
offline.
about this. Yeah, we did.
Please, can you set that up for,
so like it just there was just so much fingering this season. I don't know how else to say it. It was just kind of weird. It almost like it felt like it was almost too much. And I saw a couple of people even saying it's like they can't kiss without him trying to touch her. And it's like, okay, like, yeah, that makes sense. Maybe they should have tossed in some variety there, but it was really weird.
He learned a lot in his travels, Pam.
Up. Yeah, I know. Maybe that's like the one thing the prostitutes taught him in all the 3 subs.
But also, did no one teach him about foreplay? Like,
I guess that's technically foreplay, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
There's other things you can touch.
You can do. Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like that must have been like a man's decision.
Yeah.
No offense, Micah.
None taken. Maybe a little bit, but
you know what you signed up for.
Yeah, pretty much.
But
you're a trooper.
You are.
In terms of whether or not these side stories came at the expense of Colin and Penelope's story, I was thinking a lot about this, and I think it depends on the intention of the writing. Like, I didn't really know coming in that the intention of each season was really to focus on one character. I always thought that there was going to be sort of narratives running throughout all the seasons, however many seasons it ended up getting. And it made me think of Game of Thrones in particular, and actually just picking some ancillary characters that I think a lot of people would be familiar with. You have Peter Baelish, you have Lord Varys, right? Like, they're essentially on the periphery for a good part of the show, but yet they're interwoven so well into the writing that at some point they're going to play a really pivotal role. And, then I was thinking about the main characters. You felt invested with Jon and Tyrion and Arya and Dany's story arcs because they were well established in season 1 and they ran the duration of the show. Honestly, I can't say that I understood the point of the side quests, as we're calling them. And the only relevant one to me was Cressida's. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Yeah. And to that point, the Cressida taking credit for Whistledown is actually a plot point from the book. So maybe that's why it resonated with you, because that was kind of a fully fleshed out arc. Although, and I was telling Morgan something similar on her show because she also did some Bridgerton content and I joined her for that. It just kind of felt like a lot of these subplots they could have dispersed them amongst maybe even season 2 as well as in season 3 so that they could have wrapped them up by the first half of season 3. And then even if they had dedicated like 15 more minutes of screen time to Colin and Penelope, it probably would have felt more fleshed out and more well-rounded. Like the setting up the Cressida arc, and I get why they couldn't do it because they couldn't really set that up without having Eloise and Penelope have a fallout, and that doesn't happen until the finale of season 2. But if they had introduced the start of her story, because that was pretty meaty, then they could have just like, shelved her to Micah's correlation with Game of Thrones until the midnight hour in the back half of season 3. And she could have come back with, a vengeance based on her
Right.
the shitty cards she's been dealt in life, basically.
And I feel like they've done other things to leave breadcrumbs and set up future story arcs, like with Benedict, for example. All of his bisexual threesomes this season
Sexcapades.
made total sense because they've been establishing that for him, like not the bisexual threesomes themselves, but they've been establishing an openness socially and being entrenched in the art world for him since season 1.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like that would come out of nowhere and you wouldn't be expecting it to happen. So I totally agree. I think they could have even established Eloise starting to drift from Penn a little sooner so that they could maybe end season 2 on Eloise and Cressida starting to get closer. That way, when you came into season 3, it would be established that this is a relationship that's a friendship that's been budding between seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes more sense and again just has more time to breathe.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we got kind of whiplash with Cressida because there is, you haven't noted here that it's like a bit of a softer side to her. And we definitely get to see that in the first half of season 3 to the point where I kind of felt a little bad for her because I was like, oh, you're fine. Like you finally have a real female friendship, or you think you do. So you're starting to act more, I don't know, like a character that I can empathize with. And I feel bad for you because I kind of feel like Eloise is using you to get back at Penelope. But then she just comes back and has to be bad bitch villain again. And it's just like such a quick turnaround. And then the payoff for that never really happens because again, there's not like a multi-episode arc of focus on Cressida trying to say that she's Lady Whistledown.
I guess I still felt bad for her because I mean she was going to be married off to that old guy.
Oh
like,
yeah.
Yeah. I guess I kind of don't blame her for blackmailing them, and I kind of wish they showed her mercy and just helped her out a bit because she was in a pretty shitty situation.
I agree. I definitely do. I just wish it had been I just wish it had been allowed to breathe a little bit more because it just felt very abrupt. Where it was like, oh, you're acting kind of like a normal person. And now you're going on a vengeance arc that's only going to last like, 2 episodes?
I'm telling you, multi-season blackmail.
Yeah. That would have been great. More mystery, more everything.
I get it. It's not a mystery show as much as I try and make it.
No.
Into
But
I mean,
no, but
there
it would
are
have raised the
aspects of it,
stakes.
though.
Yeah, there are. Because you don't know all the time like what these characters are gonna do. And with like the big secret of Whistledown, like we're keyed into that, but no one else knows. So there's still a mystery element, even if we know the answer.
I was really disappointed with the side plot with Kate and Anthony. It just felt like it was all just being set up to write them out of the show. And they are my favorite couple. They are my favorite season. I have all these notes to defend them, like if it comes up in this episode. But I was really disappointed in what we got with them this season. I wish we got more.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand that if was season 2 your favorite season, Morgan?
It was my favorite. Yeah. I loved it. And I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Are you an enemies to lovers girly?
So, I've done a lot of thinking about this, and I don't think they were true enemies. Like, if I saw like a true enemies to lovers, I'd be like, I don't know, this is a little weird. I think there's some tension and some back and forth, but I don't think they're enemies. But I think what comes with that trope often is just that really slow burn. And I think it's the slow burn that I like, and like that tension build up. So that's the piece of it. And Jonathan Bailey, I mean, the way, like his facial expressions, like he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can definitely agree with you on the slow burn aspect of it. I do love a good slow burn. I mean, you heard me probably talking about this in the reaction, but I think they're terrible people.
I know. And I wrote notes I was like, I have all these notes defending them, like trying to understand that.
Hey, listen, I'm all about it. Like, I would love to have my mind changed on it. So if there's breathing room for it, I would love to do that, because I was watching season 2 and I was just like, I don't get it with these two. I'm tired of seeing them, and I would love a different perspective.
I think, Micah, also you said that season 2 was not your favorite. I'm curious about what fell flat for you in that regard, even though I know you've mentioned them many times before in our discussions that you're not the target demo for Bridgerton.
Yeah, I'm trying to actually remember a lot of season 2, and maybe that's part of the reason why it doesn't, because it doesn't stick out for me. It doesn't necessarily rank higher on the list. Maybe part of it too was the slow burn. Maybe it was too much of a slow burn from the romantic side of things. I'm just like, can we get to it already?
That makes sense. You wanted to go straight to the carriage. That's what you were looking for.
Sure. Wasn't it a field, not a carriage?
Yeah.
It was like this nice little
2?
Bungalow in the middle of nowhere, right? Morgan?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it was like
a
the gazebo area
in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. Well, I want to get back to something that is related to Cressida, which is the idea of redemption, because I feel like this is such a huge theme in season 3. So we already talked a little bit about Cressida's arc, and would it be safe to say that people here felt like she's worth redeeming, or did she take too many steps back? For me, she took one too many steps back. But also I feel like I'm a little too ruthless. It's like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So maybe I'm holding a grudge for no reason.
I think it's interesting to judge them, because it's all how they're responding to the societal pressure that's being put on them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, there was an interview that Charithra Chandra, who plays Edwina in season 2, gave, and I think she summed up Bridgerton so well. Basically, she said that the show is all about women trying to survive. And I think when you look at the show that way, a lot of the character motives do make way more sense. But I still kind of feel like there was an opportunity for Cressida to do the right thing. And we see characters that are motivated by envy and sometimes hatred that do turn over a new leaf for the better in this show. And so that's why it's hard for me to redeem her personally, because at the end of the day, she just doesn't decide to do the right thing anyway.
Yeah. I mean, do you think they're going to use her at all anymore? Like, are they
I think she's off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because she's like in the carriage at the end. And
yeah. So that's the thing. It almost feels like that it makes it easier to write her out in a way. But yeah, I can look at Cressida and I can view her as a product of the environment she was raised in, like has been surfaced here. But also just thinking about her relationship with her mother, there was no chance that she was going to come out being totally redeemable, or at the very least, it was going to be really hard for her to get there.
Yeah, that one line her mom tells when she tells her like that it's every woman for herself, like that she would even put herself over her own daughter, was insane.
Yeah, it's pretty mean.
It's rough.
It's like a Mean Girl family for sure.
She could have been so much worse, though. I mean, just asking for some money to go live her life, I didn't think it was too terrible. I felt bad for her.
Yeah, I mean, I feel bad for the circumstance that she's in. I would hope that if I were in that place, I would like handle it a little bit better to set myself up abroad. But she's a product of her environment.
Yeah.
People like that don't exist in a vacuum usually.
Yeah. Well, speaking of mothers, we also have Portia Featherington. She notoriously has been very dismissive and kind of awful towards Penelope, but she really turns over a new leaf in the back half of this season, really after Colin chews her out because he walks in on her questioning his motives for the engagement. And I wanted to ask you all if you were satisfied with the way things resolved between Penelope and her mother, because this is a lot of baggage too, a lot of hard feelings.
I loved it. And I loved that Pen was also able to defend herself. And I think that's what made me accept that redemption arc much more. And I loved that final scene where you see her grab Penelope's hand to like comfort her. I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, I agree too. I just wish that, again, it had had more room to breathe. It just felt like it was one more thing they were trying to crunch in to the second half of this season. But also just wanted to say, I think it's very on brand for Lady Featherington to only connect the dots and realize she's being shitty when she gets chastised by a man. Like, her daughter's word isn't enough, but a man from, a very prosperous family that she would look forward to being connected with, telling her off was enough to shift her perspective. And I was like, yeah, that's on brand for her.
That's a good point, because we do have that great moment in the first half of the season where Penelope asks Portia if she only matters to her if she's got a ring on her finger. And it kind of looks like Portia hesitates, but then she just does what she always does and turns her attention to her other two daughters. So it's the dichotomy of those two moments specifically is actually fascinating. So you bring up a good point.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it's funny how quickly that shifts, and you see the shift happen as soon as she realizes, oh, this engagement is real and seems like it's a done deal. She immediately kind of dismisses and abandons her other two daughters. Like, it's funny because her preference definitely flip-flops.
She spent enough time with them.
Yeah, but it's on the basis of Penelope now being the one who is getting married to someone from a very prominent and rich family.
Yeah.
So I actually think this goes back to what we were just talking about with the societal pressures. And I think that Lady Featherington is a perfect example of this as well, because you think about the situation that her husband left the family in. And by no means am I trying to legitimize her treatment of Penelope, but I do think there's a lot to unpack with her character. And I think she's very much overwhelmed by both societal pressures as well as taking care of her family. And she's trying to figure out how to properly balance the two.
Yeah. And also, like, you have to remember that she does not understand the idea of a love match because she's always been in a loveless marriage. And that was probably the same situation she was in growing up. I'm sure that it's just like, what is it called? Like generational baggage. And I think that is where like that is Colin's blind side always. And we see that too with the way that he approaches Cressida, is that he assumes, and I think he does this with Penelope too, but he assumes that all families genuinely love each other, when the reality is that there's loveless families in different degrees and varying degrees all around him. And he just like doesn't realize, because he's lucky enough to have been born from two parents that love each other and to exist in a family that genuinely does care about each other.
True.
So the last character I wanted to bring up in this like redemption arc theme is Penelope. And the reason that I wanted to bring her up is because she is strangely a super polarizing character in the fandom. People love to hate her if they don't like her. And so I wanted to ask you guys if you feel like she's a character that needs redeeming or if she doesn't.
I'm still very confused on why so many people don't like her because, I mean, yeah, she's posting things that make people unhappy, but she's only writing the truth. Like, I don't get why the fandom, like so many people in the fandom don't like her. I don't think she needs redemption because I don't think she did anything to deserve that, I guess.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask how people hate on her in the fandom because of course she's not a perfect character, but none of us are perfect people. That's what makes her interesting. And she's again someone who is a product of her circumstances. She's stuck on this whole marriage mart yearly routine that she's constantly on the edges of, constantly an outsider to. And she found a way to carve out a little space for herself and give herself a voice. So I don't personally understand what's to hate about that. And I'm wondering, Pam, what are the things that people criticize her for? The people who don't like her, what are the things that they hate her for?
It really is. I think that people are way too hard on her. And I think that they forget that when the show starts, Penelope is 17. She's only 19, maybe 20 by the time season 3 ends. So, and she talks about this at the end of season 3. She says that she was forced to debut a year early than she wanted to. And but like when you're 17, you're still a child. I don't think she even realized that she didn't really probably grasp how much power she could have with the whole whistle down thing. But people just hold her to such a high standard, and they just think that she's an awful person for everything she's written, everybody she's torn down. They're too hard on her about the Marina thing, even though she did that in an effort to protect Colin. They're hard on her about the Eloise thing, even though, again, she was doing that to protect her friend. So I think a lot of this is like internalized, maybe subconscious fat phobia towards the actress, Nicola Coughlan, who is mid-sized at best, but does exist in a curvier frame. And a lot of times people don't even realize that they're being biased because of the way someone looks, but that happens in society all the time. And it's like, there's like no real good reason. But if you go online, it's crazy to see how many people just don't like her and feel like she doesn't deserve a happy ending. And they always point to the Lady Whistledown business, which is really not that bad. And again, like a lot of the decisions she makes, even the bad ones, you have to take age into account there too. Of course, there's going to be some petulance.
Yeah. I also just think about, I mean, other characters who've done things that I think are objectively worse, like Marina trying to trick Colin into marrying her so that she can quickly have sex with him and convince him that she's pregnant with his child, or she's pregnant with his child. Like, again, that is someone who's a product of the time that they're living in, doing the only thing that they can to survive. So I understand why it happens, but I think Penelope's doing that too, just in a different way. I mean, look at Lady Featherington and everything that she does over the course of the series to try and help her family survive.
Yeah.
I mean, she literally steals from the Ton.
I think that also is what helped them in their redemption arc with each other, is because Portia saw a lot of the similar traits in Penelope that she has herself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was nice to see them both realize that they are more similar than they realized.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to say, I don't know the name of the actor who plays Portia, but she's fantastic. I love her. I feel like anytime she's in a scene, she steals it. She's so good.
Yeah.
I love her too.
The 3 Featherington women, they're so good at playing that, like, kind of almost like unserious, but they clearly take themselves very seriously trio. Their scenes were some of the best. And also like the fact that like the 2 sisters have doting husbands that they don't really care too much about was just really nice comic relief too. They really like fit in super well with the whole Featherington brood. So, well, I wanted to talk as well about the Lady Whistledown reveal because this was obviously the huge elephant in the room this season. And this happens like in 2 parts, right? So the first part of the Whistledown reveal is that Colin finds out, and that happens at the end of episode 6, and he doesn't take it well. Do you all think that he was justified in his feelings, or did they draw that out a little too long?
Should have been longer.
You think so? Like a whole other
Yeah.
season?
Well, I don't know about that. We only have a certain amount of time to work with here,
It's
but
true.
Yeah.
go ahead, Laura.
I agree, though. I feel like based on how upset he was, he got over it pretty quickly.
That's why I don't think he was really upset about the fact that she was Lady Whistledown,
Mhm.
but more about his own insecurity of being a writer. And that's the part that really got to him, is like that jealousy and that envy. And I think maybe that was easier for him to work through than if he was just angry that she is Lady Whistledown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which I actually think is like, that's such a great little plot point to play with. It just sucks
Yeah.
that like they decided to have that entire evolution happen off screen, because we don't get to see
Yeah.
the way that he grapples with that and the way that he comes to terms with the fact that he should be proud of his super cool wife for everything she's built for herself. So
Yeah, they don't really spend a lot of time on that, do they? They allude to his writing, is it in the first part of this season? But they don't really go
Yeah.
into it in too much.
So the
Detail.
thing about Colin that people have to remember, and also this like is in relation to Colin and Penelope, is that their story actually unfolds over the course of all 3 seasons, but the show doesn't really do a good job of reminding us that there's like building blocks to work with that have happened before the events of season 3, because like they're building him up as a writer anyway through all of these like letters he's been writing, and you know, he makes all these offhanded comments about like his travel journals and everything he's seen. And I think in a way we are kind of supposed to forget that that's part of who he is, because nobody cares and they all think it's really boring. And that's why he completely like ditches that part of himself in the first half of season 3, because everybody thinks that it doesn't matter. So he's like, let me just come back and I'll just be the person that they want me to be, which is a rake, right? And then him and Penelope have been writing together like back and forth for 3 seasons. So of course she would know that he's a good writer because they've been exchanging letters, and she's like the only one basically that was writing him back. And I wish they would have emphasized that more.
And the rake
Mhm.
piece is interesting because it's really, in a way, him emulating his brothers, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So he's like, Anthony and Benedict are well accepted in society, so let me just be them. That's who I'm supposed to be. And it's really sad that like even his own friends keep telling him that he's way more fun this season. And it's specifically because he's trying to be somebody he's not. Okay, so speaking of the Lady Whistledown reveal, there is a moment as well, obviously, when Portia finds out. How did you all feel about the fact that like everybody in the room was trying to decide what to do without Penelope, even though she was like standing right there? This was a comment that we got from one of our listeners on Instagram. We asked you all to write it and ask us what you wanted us to talk about. So we appreciate you all doing that because we got quite a bit of feedback.
Yeah, I mean, it really felt like nobody was taking Penn's opinion into account about any of this. I mean, even Colin deciding he was going to go and confront Cressida. I feel like I recall this part I have not seen again, but I feel like I recall Penn trying to be like, it's not going to work, man. And then it didn't work. In fact, it made it worse. She asked for double.
20,000 pounds.
Yeah.
That's still a lot of money today.
Yeah.
I didn't like how Penn kept saying, oh, no, it's not your fault. Don't apologize. It's all my fault. Because I don't think what she was doing was that terrible for them all to be so desperate to get her to stop. But I mean, I guess if we look at it, like they're so scared of how the queen will react, I guess it kind of makes sense that they felt that tension. But otherwise, I don't think it was that bad.
Yeah. Also, I mean, with the queen angle, I can definitely see people being worried about that. But what is she like? What is this version of Queen Charlotte shown that she'll actually do? I feel
don't know.
like
They made it seem like they were going to take her to the guillotine.
I know. But it
This
just
isn't
seems
Game
like
of Thrones, though, so I think we're
Yeah.
okay.
She's not going to get her head spiked on.
it seems like she likes playing Queen Bee.
Yeah.
And she kind of
Yeah.
lives for the drama. That's how this version of Queen Charlotte is being portrayed. So, I mean, I guess she could cast you out of society, which would be
And
a
she
big
does with
deal.
Cressida.
Yeah,
and
that's
like
true.
the
She
end of
does.
Cressida's world. So I don't know. I feel like Penelope might not care that much if she did that, because it just would mean that she wouldn't be able to go to any more balls, and it doesn't really seem like she has too much fun at the balls anyway if she's not
Mhm.
seeking out gossip. So
Right. Yeah, that would probably be a bigger deal to Portia to have a daughter who's been cast out. And I mean, who knows what would happen to the rest of the Featheringtons by association? Because this was all
Yeah.
happening under Portia's roof. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Is like it was all happening right under her nose. I mean, Penelope constantly had ink stains all over her fingers and was disappearing. She says so herself, like, you would disappear at a very specific time at all these events. Like,
Mhm.
should have put the pieces together.
Yeah, I think that, like, I actually really like that she mentioned that, and I think that, like, in the context of how quickly Colin found out, it makes a lot of sense, because of course he would be more observant than her own mother, because her own mother's never really cared, but he only has eyes for her, so he is going to notice if her hands have ink stains, and he does. And the only reason he finds out is because he's concerned for her well-being, so he follows her. But like Portia never does that, you know? So she, like, in her mind, like, she doesn't even think to be careful, because she's never like lived with anybody or had anybody care enough to, like, you know, see what she's up to. The second half of this Whistledown reveal is that Penelope ends up fessing up to the entire ton about being Whistledown. And basically she ends up doing this so that she can get out of the blackmail with Cressida, and that also so she can, like, protect her own family, like both of her families now, from whatever wrath the queen might have. So she goes to her first, and that's how they end up resolving all of that. I wasn't sure if they were actually going to do this. This is, again, something that happens in the book. She does end up coming clean to everybody. But just because Whistledown is such a big part of narrating the story, I just wasn't sure if they were going to go through with this on the show. Were you all surprised that this happened?
One thing that I thought they maybe could have decided to do was to have Penelope go directly to the queen herself, and maybe have her still remain this Lady Whistledown moniker, but still be in service to the queen. Because at the end of the day, the queen just wants her as her pawn, as an asset, as, you know, the local gossip that can whisper things into her ear before it actually goes to print.
Yeah.
And that would have been something that would have been different, that, I don't know, I would have found to be a little bit more interesting than just the complete reveal. And then, of course, she actually says her name at the end of the episode, right? Instead of it being Lady Whistledown, it's Penelope Bridgerton.
Yeah. How do you all think that, like, that's going to work going forward? Because the actress has confirmed
lots of hate mail.
Lots of hate mail. Well, I was thinking about that. I know you're joking, but I was like, if this was 2024, she would just, like, set up an anonymous, like, PO box or something, or like virtual ask, and people could just send in gossip tips there. Penelope would be like the Dimois of 2024, right? All the tips would come to her. But how's this going to work in Regency era?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that they could do, what was that website that was really popular back in the Post Secret?
Post Secret.
They could do a Regency era version of Post Secret. I mean, that could be one
cute.
way.
Yeah. Or maybe everybody just goes back to not paying attention to her, and she gets her secrets the same way that she did before, just being like on the sidelines, but this time on purpose.
I'm really glad that there's been a running Game of Thrones correlation over the course of this episode, thanks to Micah, because my thought was that maybe Penelope would be like Varys, and she would just have little birds that told her everything. You know, she would have her own version of the little birds.
That would be funny. And I think the queen would be so jealous because I think she tries to have her own version of the little birds and it doesn't seem like it works out as well for her.
I also just think it would be really funny if like now that they've resolved things, like Colin was the one that was feeding her the hot goss from the men's side, you know?
That would be cute.
It's like, honey, you will never believe what I heard at the club.
Yeah.
Like right when he gets home. I think that would be really funny. Well, to wrap things up here, like I said a bit earlier, we did get some listener questions submitted over on Instagram. You can follow us at What the Hype Podcast. And you can also submit feedback through our website, which is whatthehypepodcast.com. So first up here from Ainsley Belton 33. This person writes, what did you think of Eloise's ultimatum for Penn to tell Colin the truth?
Well, I didn't like, Laura, I think you mentioned this earlier, like by midnight, you know, it's a little too heavy, but I'm actually fine with it. I'm fine with the ultimatum. I don't like the time constraint necessarily, but I don't hate it.
It felt like that was for the midnight thing was for the trailers. To amp up the tension and the anticipation for the season. Because, you know, she gave her the ultimatum and she didn't follow through with it. So it's like, cool, way to show that your ultimatums have no weight.
But understanding that she's coming from, and I know there's a lot to unpack with her character from this season too, but she's coming from the perspective of his sister, right? Like, so there is a level of concern here in terms of how this news is going to ultimately impact him as well as the entire family. So I think that she is, part of it's coming from a place of caring, part of it's coming from a place of spite.
Yeah.
I think it's jealousy too.
Oh, definitely.
Like jealousy over getting married or just them having a relationship?
I think it's a couple of things.
Yeah.
One, I think Eloise feels left behind. She talks about this all the time. Oh, look, it's just another friend who's been married off and now all they're going to do is do married people things. And meanwhile, I'm out here trying to be a scholar and, you know, at the same time, feeling like I'm left on the fringes and like I don't have any power in the society as a woman. And I've been trying to track down the identity of this Lady Whistledown for years at this point. And all the while, she's been right under my nose. And I didn't think for 2 seconds that it could have been this person that I'm really close to. So I think it's jealousy on the marriage count, but also on account of Penn kind of doing the thing that Eloise wishes she could do herself.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. Because she does, and she starts off really impressed that Lady Whistledown is a woman, and she has her own volition. You know, that's a big part of her admiration, and that's a big part of why she wants to find out who she is.
Right. So it's very much like, oh, that's so cool and that's so admirable, and I want to be like her. Oh, but I don't want that for my family, right? Like I can admire it from afar, but don't come up in my family's business and create drama for us.
Ariel W4 says, sex scene with Penn and Colin, awkward / cringe or realistic?
Ask
we
the
haven't
mirror.
talked at all about the mirror. I thought that the scene works. I think the scene works really well because consent still plays into it. And I really appreciate how this show features consent throughout. Probably not just in season 3, but in season 3, that's a huge like motive. And you see that in the carriage scene where Colin's always checking in, and you see that in the mirror scene where he checks in a couple times. And I think that's really great.
You know, this is one of the things that I feel pretty much the same about as I did when we did our reaction video. I thought the scene was really well done. I think it shows that they had a pretty amazing intimacy coordinator working on set, which is great. I also feel like the scene could have been longer, honestly. Yeah. Like the sex is very quick, and Colin Bridgerton has been around the block. He ain't a 2-pump chump. Like, could have been a little longer. I think we could have stood for that.
I had somebody reach out to me and they said that they wished they lost their virginity to Colin because they loved how that scene played out.
Oh, listen, I think that's fair. I think that's a fair aspiration. Like, oh, I wish I had lost my virginity to him on that couch in that beautiful space where I'm feeling so supported and like loved and everything. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of beauty to the scene. I just think it could have lasted longer.
I think you're right. Justice for Colin, poor guy. The last question we have here comes from Gabriel V. Tolentino. And this was actually submitted by a few people in varying ways. So this person asked us to weigh in on the show's decision to gender bend the character of Michael Sterling, who shows up as Michaela at the end of the season. And this might actually be kind of hard for us to answer since neither of us have read this book. But if anybody does have any context for how this works out in the book, I'd love for you to weigh in.
So I mean, I've just been following other creators who have read the books and can speak more to it. I think it seems like one of the biggest things that people didn't like about this gender bend is that I guess in Francesca's story, there's an infertility arc where she's having trouble getting pregnant, and people are like introducing, a gender bend here where it's not Michael Sterling. I guess it's making people wonder if they're even going to do the infertility subplot, because apparently that really resonated with a lot of people and it was something they were hoping to see.
Yeah, that's all I pretty much know about it too. But I'm sure they can still work that in a different way, because even in the real world, same sex couples struggle with infertility issues if they're trying to get pregnant by IVF. So
yeah, well, and I think some of that might also be, and again, this is just my interpretation, could be totally wrong. I think sometimes people get hung up on the idea of historical accuracy. So they would sit there and say like, well, yeah, same-sex couples, today struggle, with issues of fertility just like anyone else does. And then the, historical gatekeepers want to come in and say like, well, a same-sex couple wouldn't have been able to do that at that point anyway. And I think when people are thinking about it that way, they're kind of missing the point of the show. Anytime I watch the show, I do not think that the show's priority is to be historically accurate. So for me personally, I didn't mind the gender bend. I honestly didn't even know it was one because I didn't know about the Michael Sterling thing before. But even after I found it out, I still thought that it was interesting. And I just loved getting to see Francesca's difference in reactions to like kissing her husband, but then just being introduced to her husband's cousin and the jaw drop moment and being unable to vocalize in that moment. I thought it was cute, and it makes me really interested to see what's going to happen in that castle next season.
Hell yeah. We get a little Game of Thrones-esque going on, but
Right.
Didn't you feel that there were hints that were dropped throughout the season
Yes.
about Francesca? So was this really a surprise to people?
Mhm.
And I agree with you. I think without knowing that they decided to make this change of character, I would have known unless you all just told me right now. Like I never would have known that they took a character and completely changed their gender. But I feel like that's the direction that Francesca's storyline was going in, at least kind of beneath the surface, because there was a lot of talk with her mother, especially about, the love match and her mother talking a lot about wanting her children to be happy with somebody that they truly love. And so it just seemed like to me that was the direction that it was going in.
Interesting.
I agree.
I think the show blindsided me because, I was still wondering if they would or wouldn't with Benedict, which they did set up early on, right? There is that whole scene in, I think it's season 1, where he walks in on a threesome at the
Mhm.
art party or whatever, and he doesn't look disinterested. But then the showrunner, to be fair, it's a different showrunner now. The showrunner came out and said, "Oh, that doesn't mean that Benedict's gay. It was supposed to show that he's an ally." It's like, okay, what? Excuse you.
I mean, I'm an ally, but I'm an ally.
Yeah.
I have limits.
What?
No, but he did not look like an ally. He looks like he was like, maybe I would like to join. And
Oh yeah, his eyes lingered a little too long for that to just be allyship.
It's so funny. I don't know if this reference is going to land, but because it is like a pop culture reference. But so my brother was binging Bridgerton like a fiend, and he texts me out of the blue one day. He's like, "But so Benedict's bi, right?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know, because everybody thinks so, but then the showrunner said this," and he is like, "No, that guy's crazy." He's like, "Are you sure?" I'm pretty sure he's Pink Pony Club hot to go. Which, if you guys are listening to Chapel Roan, you'll know that Chapel Roan is, an amazing queer artist, and those are her 2 bigger songs on the radio right now or on streaming right now. But yeah, so he was and then he texted me again at the end of the season. He's like, "I told you he was Pink Pony Club." Who was anybody kidding? So he felt the most vindicated. And I think a lot of people did too. But, and it's not necessarily for me that 2 queer siblings cannot exist in one family, because obviously that happens even in the real world. But I just really thought they would check one box for Bridgerton, not 2, and not at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't really expecting it personally, but I don't have a problem with it. I think it's cool.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. And I actually got spoiled before I even watched the show at 7 a.m. the morning the show came out, which was disappointing.
That sucks.
Yeah. I read that what people are more upset about is Francesca's reaction to John, because I guess in the books she is in love with him, and they didn't like how they kind of took that out of the show.
Yeah, I feel like in the show they kind of made the 2 of them, when they were together, seem not disinterested, but very disengaged with each other. Whereas when you saw John when he was around the boys, at the pub, he was totally different. I thought it was interesting that they established the 2 of them, might not have the love match that Violet had envisioned for her children. But then I can see how if maybe that was what your interpretation was just that, hey, Francesca is she's found a good match that is safe and comfortable, and that's good enough for her. Oh, wait, she's a lesbian. I can definitely see how, if you had been interpreting it that way, it would have caught you off guard. In retrospect, the hints were there, but I can see how maybe you would have read it a different way.
Well, to wrap things up here, I wanted to ask all of you where season 3 ranks for you in the grand scheme of the whole Bridgerton franchise.
Number 3. Season 3 is number 3 for me.
All right, that's fair.
I think I ranked earlier, but it still holds at number 2 for me right now.
Okay.
It's number 3.
What's your number 1 for now? Number 3
so Morgan, you're 2-1-3.
No, I don't Queen Charlotte. So it's season 2,
okay.
Queen Charlotte.
So 2 Queen
3.
Charlotte, and then 3. And then season 1.
And then 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your number 1, Micah?
For right now, season 1, but
Okay.
I do like Queen Charlotte, so we'll have to see how that turns out. It might bump itself up to number 1.
All right. I feel like I need to sit with it a little bit longer, but for now, right now, I'm putting it at number 2, and Queen Charlotte is my number 1. But if it gets bumped down to 3, then I would put season 1 at number 2.
And it for sure, Queen Charlotte is number 1 for me. So yeah, I'd probably go Queen Charlotte 1, 3, then 2. But I definitely want Morgan to change my mind on season 2. So I'm going to follow up with you after we do this so I can get your take.
Okay.
Because you're smart and I trust you. And I feel like you could enlighten me on some things.
Oh,
so I'm
boy.
very open.
That's a lot of pressure.
No. Don't feel no pressure. I'm very interested to chat with you about it.
All right. Well, that was our Bridgerton Part 2 episode. Thank you so much for listening. We know this was like a little bit longer, or maybe it won't be after Andrew finishes editing it.
He is a master.
Yeah, he is a master. If you're hungry for more Bridgerton content, though, you are in luck because, like we said at the top of this episode, Laura and I did record an initial reactions video, which is up on our YouTube channel right now. Laura, can you tell us a little bit more about that and like how it fits into the context of the content we'll be creating on What the Hype?
Yeah. So we know that sometimes we're going to want to get quick reactions to new things that drop. That doesn't necessarily give us the time to record a whole episode like this and put it through all the production it requires to get up on the feed. So with things like latest episode drops of Bridgerton and The Boys, we will be doing our very best to record reaction videos as soon as we've watched them, which we're calling our water cooler videos because we like to think of it as like, this is the water cooler talk that you would hear from your friends or maybe colleagues if you're talking about the latest show that you saw last night or over the weekend at the water cooler at work. Now, I will say some of this content from Bridgerton and The Boys may not necessarily be work water cooler appropriate, but that's why we're there for you. So head on over to our channel and we have that water cooler section set up as a playlist. So you can check it out now. We're definitely going to get more videos up in the weeks ahead.
And Morgan, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated all your insight. And where can our listeners find you and your podcast online?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Like I said, just talking to all of you really is just a dream. So you can find That Nerd Thing anywhere you listen to podcasts, or you can follow the show on Instagram and TikTok at That Nerd Thing Pod.
And our Bridgerton episode will be up soon on your feed as well.
Yeah, whenever I edit.
A little bit different from what we did here, right?
Yeah, so we went through every single episode, a lot of the scenes, and I don't know when it will be out because I'm not a master at editing like Andrew is, so we'll see.
Well, neither are any of us, so you're in good company.
Yeah. Trust me.
So you can go check that out over at Morgan's That Nerd Thing if you want more Bridgerton content too. And also make sure to check out some of the interviews that she does. Laura and Andrew were already interviewed as well over there. Their episodes are really great. And sounds like Micah will be on soonish. So you keep an eye out for that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. For sure.
Sounds
tell
like
me
a
when.
threat.
Okay. You all have an open invitation to come on literally anytime you want.
And thanks to everybody for listening. Of course, we're still a new show, so this is really important in the early days that you follow us in your podcast app and leave a review. It's going to help make the show a success.
Second, be sure to follow us on social media. We're on TikTok, YouTube, Twitch, and Instagram as What the Hype Podcast. Our website is whatthehypepodcast.com. And on X, we are What the Hype Show because we couldn't get What the Hype Podcast on there. Lame, I know. But if you want to email us about anything, you can drop us a line at whatthehypepodcast@gmail.com.
Finally, do you know a friend or family member who's obsessed with Bridgerton? Be sure to share this episode with them and tell them we're walking through every aspect of pop culture each week. So that's our show. That was The Hype. And I don't know, maybe someday soon we'll be back for more Bridgerton content for you all. But until then, we'll see you all for the next episode.
Bye, y'all. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks for your listenership.